Good day, everyone. I am Cheshami Enoch, and I will be discuss the Myanmar literature. I actually have a partner, Miss Maria Cristina Rocabo, but unfortunately, she's still not in a good condition right now. So I will report our topic by myself. So let's start. Myanmar is officially known as the Republic of the Union of Myanmar. It is a country located in Southeast Asia. So take a look at this picture. So Myanmar is situated in the western part of Southeast Asia. It shares borders with several countries such as Bangladesh to the northwest, India to the northwest and northeast part, Laos to the east, and Thailand to the southeast. And its capital city is called Nai Pitao or Nai Pidao. So, next is the Golden Land. Myanmar, also known as Burma, is often referred to as the Golden Land due to its rich cultural heritage, natural beauty, and abundance of natural resources. So, Myanmar is known for its rich biodiversity and is considered as one of the world's biodiversity hotspot. And the country is home to various ecosystems including tropical rainforest, mangroves, freshwater lake, and mountain ranges. It also boasts a wide range of plants and animals including endangered species such as tigers, elephants, and Irrawaddy dolphins. And it's important to note that the term Golden Land is more of a poetic or metaphorical description rather than a literal one. It captures the rich cultural heritage, natural beauty, and historical significance of Myanmar, reflecting the country's allure and mystique. So, next is their flag. So their flag's designer intended the yellow band to represent the solidarity, the green band to stand for peace and tranquility, and the red band to symbolize courage and decisive action, while the white star on the flag represents the country itself and the importance of the union of its constituent parts. So let's now proceed to the history. Myanmar's earliest recorded civilization dates back to the Pew City states in the first millennium AD. The region saw the rise and fall of various kingdoms, including the Mon and the Bagan Empire, which reached its height between the 9th and 13th centuries. Bagan was a center of Theravada Buddhism and left behind thousands of temples and pagodas. So, by the 9th century, a group of people from the north called the Bamar gained prominence and founded the powerful kingdom of Pagan, or today it's called Bagan. Old city-states gave way to a more unified administration which reached its apogee during the reign of the king Aniruddha, who successfully unified all of the Burma by the year 1057. So next, um, the literature of Myanmar spans over a millennium. Burmese literature was historically influenced by Indian and Thai cultures as seen in many works such as the Ramayana. The Burmese language, unlike other Southeast Asian language like Thai, adopted words primarily from Pali rather than from Sanskrit. In addition, Burmese literature has the tendency to reflect local folklore and culture. So, Burmese literature has historically been a very important aspect of Burmese life steeped in the Pali canon of Buddhism. And traditionally, Burmese children were educated by monks in monasteries in towns and villages. And during British colonial rule, instruction was formalized and unified and often bilingual in both English and Burmese, known as Anglo Vernacular. So, the roots of Burmese literature led to indigenous folk poetry and to the basic Buddhist literature adapted through the monks. And didactic Buddhist Jakarta stories were already being written in Burmese prose in the 15th century. And at the same time, religious as well as historical poetry evolved. and together with the epistle addressed to the king. And in the beginning, the writers were educated monks and later also members of the court. After the Burmese had, for the first time, raised the Thai capital of Ayutthaya in the 16th century, themes from Thai literature were adapted to the Burmese tradition. And at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century was in many ways the golden age of Burmese culture. And new influences were again received from the cultural tradition after the sack of Ayutthaya in 1767. And among these influences was the adoption of the Ramakin, which is the Thai version of the Indian epic Ramayana. It was written in Burmese in a parody form called Ramayagan, in which the epic was set in a Burmese village context, and later it was adapted for the stage as well. And the first Burmese history chronicle was written in the 18th century, and the famous Glass Palace Chronicle of the Kings of Burma was compiled in 1829. And during the same period the national dramatist Yu Kin Yu and Yu Punya created their dramas based on Jakarta stories that are still performed today in a form of sang dance drama. So next is the characteristics. So I made it in a bullet form for you to easily understand its characteristic. So first is the Theravada Buddhism influence. Myanmar literature is deeply influenced by Theravada Buddhism, which is the predominant religion in the country. Buddhist themes, teachings, and moral values are often featured in literary works, reflecting the spiritual and ethical beliefs of the people. The second one is Pali and Sanskrit influences. Pali and Sanskrit, which are the sacred languages of Buddhism and Hinduism, respectively have a significant impact on Myanmar literature. And many ancient texts and religious scriptures are written in Pali. And Sanskrit has contributed to the vocabulary and literary style of Myanmar literature. Next is the oral tradition. Um, Myanmar has a long-standing oral tradition with storytelling, folklore, and oral poetry playing a vital role in the literary heritage of the country. Folktales, legends, and myths passed down through generations have been incorporated into written works, adding a distinct flavor to Myanmar literature. The fourth one is the political and social commentary. Um, Myanmar literature has a long history of political and social commentary, reflecting the country's tumultuous past and ongoing struggles for freedom and democracy. And writers have used their works to critique oppressive regimes, advocate for social justice, and explore the complexities of power and governance. And the last one is the influence of colonial period. Myanmar underwent a period of British colonial rule from the late 19th century until independence in 1948. And this period had a significant impact on Myanmar literature with the introduction of Western literary forms and themes. And writers began experimenting with new styles, incorporating elements of realism, satire, and social criticism into their works. So these characteristics provide a glimpse into the diverse and culturally rich literary tradition of Myanmar. And it is very important to note that Myanmar literature is a vast and evolving field encompassing a wide range of genres, styles, and themes, and individual works may exhibit unique characteristics beyond these general trends. So, let's now move on to the development of Myanmar literature. And let's have first the classical literature of Myanmar. So, The earliest forms of Burmese literature were on stone engravings, which is called kyoksa, for memorials or for special occasions such as the building of a temple or a monastery. Later, palm leaves were used as paper, which is piasa, which is resulted in the rounded forms of the Burmese alphabet. During the Bagan dynasty, King Anawrahta adopted Theravada Buddhism as the state religion and brought many Pali texts from Ceylon. So, these texts were translated, but Pali remained the literary medium of the Burmese kingdom. And non-fiction and religious works prevailed during this period, although Kagyen, a war poem by a monarch, was an early form of this genre in history. As literature grew more liberal and secular, poetry became the most popular form of literature in Myanmar. The flexibility of the Burmese language, because of its monosyllabic and tonal nature and its lack of many consonantal finals, allowed poetry to utilize various rhyming schemes. So, next, um, by the 1400s, four primary genres of poetry had emerged, namely Pew, which is a poems based on the Jataka tales, Linka, a metaphysical and religious poems, Mogon, historical verses written as a hybrid of epic and ode, and Aigyen, a lullabies of the royal family. Courtiers also perfected the Mitaza, a long prose letter. So, monks were also influential in developing Burmese literature. And during this time, Shin Mahatila Wonta wrote a chronicle on the history of Buddhism. A contemporary of his, Shin Otamagyaw, was famous for his epic verses called Taula that reveled in the natural beauty of the seasons, forest, and travel. And after the conquest of the Siam by the Tonggo dynasty, Thailand became a Burmese colony. And this conquest incorporated many Thai elements into Burmese literature. And most evident were the Yado or Yato, an emotional and philosophic verse, and the Yagan, which imitated the themes of the Yado genre. And some parts of Laos and Cambodia also became Burmese colonies during Second Burmese Empire. Yeah. So next, as the Konbaung dynasty emerged in the 1700s, the Third Burmese Empire was founded. This era has been dubbed the Golden Age of Literature. And after a second conquest of Ayutthaya, which is the Thailand, many spoils of war were brought to the Burmese court. The Ramayana was introduced and was adapted in Burmese. In addition, the Ramayana inspired romantic poems, which became popular literary sojourns among the royal class. So, Burmese literature during this period was therefore modeled after the Ramayana, and dramatic plays were patronized by the Burmese court. And monks remained powerful in Burmese literature, compiling histories of Burma. Um, Kigan Shingi in the year 1757 to 1807 wrote the Jataka tales incorporating Burmese elements including the Mitaza. And during the First Anglo-Burmese War, year 1823 to 1826, more solemn and muted moods exuded from Burmese literature, including lyrical music. So let's now have the colonial literature of Myanmar. So the British author George Orwell, who was severely critical of the Burmese, wrote Burmese Days, published in 1935. When Burma became a colony of British India, Burmese literature continued to flourish. Um, English literature was still relatively inaccessible, although both English and Burmese were now taught in schools. And Despite the fact that Burmese literature was well entrenched in Burmese culture, the lack of patrons to support literature did slow its further development. So, beginning in the 1920s, a nationalist movement emerged, and this influence became evident in modern novels, short stories, and poems. And at the University of Rangon, student writers continued to develop new forms of Burmese poetry. Uh, a major landmark in Burmese literature was called the Kitsan movement, or the testing the age, a search for a new style and content, led most notably by Teipan Maongwa along with Nyuso, uh, Zaogye, Mintuwon, and Miyakaito while still at university and after in the decade before the Second World War. And the movement for independence continued to fuel Burmese literature. And Takin Kodaw Maing was greatly influential in spawning this anti-colonial literature with his powerful Legyugye and Tika verses famous for their patriotic and satirical content. So now let's move on to the post-colonial literature of Myanmar. So after independence in the 1950s, Burmese literature went further to adapt and assimilate Western styles of writing. Many contemporary works are of history and biographical accounts. And because of strict government censorship beginning in the 1960s with the role of Newin, Burmese literature has lost many of its historical characteristics and is often mundane in nature. Short stories in magazines, however, continued to be published and remain very popular. And one of the greatest female writers of the colonial period is Giana o Gyao Mamale. The journalist Ludo Yula was the author of numerous volumes of ethnic minority folklore, novels about inmates in Yuno era jails, and biographies of people working in different occupations. And the Prime Minister Yuno himself wrote several politically oriented plays and novels. And let's now proceed to the Myanmar prose and poetry. So Burma has always had a great poetry tradition. It is an integral part of Burmese society and something poets have carried with them across generations. In the 1930s, the Kitsan poetry movement came out of Yangon University. Kitsan is sometimes translated as testing the times and sometimes as renewal of times. Kitsan poets were involved in the independence struggle during British rule through their poetry and political activism. So, poets in Burma have often been associated with some form of political activism. So, it's no wonder that today, quite a few poets and writers serve in various capacities within the current government. The president himself is the son of a poet and known for his literary inclinations. However, poetry transcends politics. Most Burmese people grow up reading poetry from kindergarten until university, both in Burmese and English. And a lot of young people dabble in writing poetry and some continue to do so. A few well-known poets say they started to write poetry after their first loves broke their hearts. And today, the poetry scene in Burma is thriving. Poets write in various styles and traditions from Kitpor, meaning modern, which emerged in the 1970s to conceptualize autoconceptual forms including flarf and visual poetry. As the country opens up, the outside world has become curious about Burmese arts and culture. Young Burmese poets are writing experimental poetry about social justice issues and collaborating with artists and writers from other countries. And some example is the poetry anthology Bones Will Crow. So, let's have the Bones Will Crow, which is edited and translated by Coco Tet and James Burney. This is the first anthology of contemporary Burmese poets published in the United States, and it includes the work of Burmese poets who have been in exile and in prison. The poems include global references from a culture in which foreign books and the internet are regarded with suspicion and where censorship is an industry. So Bones Will Crow is an illuminating account of real Myanmar narrated by uncensored and often deviant Burmese who dare to dream and challenge the norms. Myanmar studies scholars and literature fans often lament the lack of authentic Burmese voices in print, accessible to the world outside Burma. Bones Will Cry not only fills this gap but also presents the readers a counter narrative of exotic Burma often associated with golden pagodas and smiling faces. Daily struggles under chronic capitalism, confronting commercialization of female bodies, and exiles' homesickness, issues of Burmese grapple with leap out of the pages of this anthology. So the next one is Ketty or Katti was ulit. So the next one is Ketty or Katti was a Burmese revolutionary poet who was killed during the 2021 Myanmar protest in Myanmar. His poems were widely used for anti-junta resistance movement in Myanmar. Ketty was at least the third poet to die during protests since the coup in February 1. He became an icon of the anti-coup protest movement after he was dead. He is considered one of the most prominent heroes of Burma's pro-democracy movement and is remembered as a hero of Myanmar's democracy. So now let's have the notable writers and their works. And I only have one here, and he is the most famous writer in Myanmar, as well as his work called On the Three Evils by the former Prime Minister of Myanmar, Yuno. So the Three Evils speech is a famous excerpt from Yuno's address to the nations on the 4th of February in 1961, during his second term as the Prime Minister of Myanmar. In the speech, Yuno identified what he called the three evils that were plaguing the country at that time. The three evils were identified as greed, narrow-mindedness, and superstition. Yuno believed that these three issues were hindering Myanmar's progress and development. So this speech of Yuno resonated with many in Myanmar at the time and continues to be remembered as an important call for social and moral reform. The Three Evils speech reflected Yuno's vision for a more progressive, united, and forward-thinking Myanmar. So let's have first the greed. Yuno spoke about the dangers of excessive greed and materialism. He believed that the pursuit of wealth and personal gain at the expense of others was detrimental to the well-being of the nation. The second one is the narrow-mindedness. Yuno emphasized the importance of inclusivity and the need to overcome narrow-mindedness. He pointed out that division based on religion, ethnicity, and other factors were hindering national unity and progress. So the last one is the superstition. Yuno criticized the reliance on superstition belief and practices. He encouraged the people to embrace education, science, and critical thinking as the means to overcome superstition and backwardness. So that will be all my report about the Myanmar literature. Thank you for listening.